So good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to this LIR seminar on digital preservation, ensuring access, authenticity, and usability for the future. My name is Jenny O'Neill, and I am the Research Engagement Officer with HEANet. And I'm also the co-chair of the EOSC Task Force for Long-Term Data Retention, where we are looking at appraisal of research data, but also reappraisal to make sure that data remain fair over time. I'm really excited this morning to introduce our three speakers. Each of them is going to have about 15 minutes to speak on their area of interest, and then we'll have a discussion at the end. So if you'd like to pop any questions that you have as we go through into the chat, and then I'll return to them at the end. I will gather all the questions as we're going along. So first up, we will have Niamh Murphy. Niamh is the Digital Preservation Librarian at UCD Library, and she is going to provide a comprehensive introduction to digital preservation for Irish academic library staff. Then we're going to have Kieran O'Leary, who is the Digital Repository Services Manager at the National Library of Ireland, and who leads the team there. He is going to be joined by his colleague, Leona Fearon, who is a digital preservation analyst. And together they are going to talk a little bit about their digital preservation policy, which was unveiled in 2023. And we will round that off nicely with Anya Mahler, who is the Senior Archivist for Sound from RTE, Radio Telefíse Éireann. And so RTE was recently honoured with an Fiat IFTA Archive Achievement Award in Media Preservation. So Anya is going to discuss this recognition in relation to the digital preservation principles, focusing on her role in leading the digitisation of RTE's extensive audio collections. So we've got what I think is an amazing lineup for you this morning. So I'm going to hand straight over to our experts. So as I said, any questions that you have that pop into your head, pop them in the chat and we will return to them at the very end. So over to you, Niamh, and thank you very much for your time this morning.
Perfect. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So yes, as Jenny said, my name is Niamh Murphy and I am the Digital Preservation Librarian with UCD Library, and I will be providing a comprehensive introduction to digital preservation. So this is an overview of what I will be talking about today. We're going to start off by defining digital preservation, followed by types of digital preservation. We're going to look a little bit at technical foundations and followed by implementation strategy. And then finally, I will speak about the work that I'm currently doing in UCD Library. So let's jump right in. What is digital preservation? Well, it is the active management of digital information to ensure it remains accessible and usable over time. The emphasis is on the long-term maintenance of authenticity, reliability, and usability. And why is it important? Well, it's important because it addresses the risk of data loss, obsolescence, and the erosion of digital assets that hold immense cultural, research, and organizational value. So with that, let's look at the ways in which we can protect these assets and the types of digital preservation. Bitstream preservation and content preservation. They are two related but distinct approaches to digital preservation. Bitstream preservation, this is the most basic level of digital preservation and focuses on ensuring that the original sequence of zeros and ones, which is the bitstream, in a digital file remains intact and unaltered over time. Bitstream preservation ensures that the digital files remain unchanged and free from corruption or loss, often achieved through regular checksums and replication of files across multiple storage locations. However, Bitstream preservation alone doesn't account for whether the content within those files remain readable or accessible as software, hardware, and formats evolve. Content preservation, on the other hand, goes beyond preserving the bitstream to focus on ensuring the ongoing usability and accessibility of the information and meaning within digital files. This requires managing issues of obsolescence, such as migrating files to newer formats or emulating old software environments to keep the content accessible and meaningful. Content preservation considers factors like file formats, software compatibility, metadata, and documentation, which help future users interpret and understand the preserved files. So, in summary, bitstream preservation protects the raw data from loss or corruption, and content preservation ensures the data remains usable, accessible, and meaningful despite technological changes over time. So, with that in mind, let's look at the technical foundations of digital preservation. Here we have an overview of bits, bytes, and digital files. Starting with bits, a bit, short for binary digit, is the smallest unit of data in a computer. It can have a value of either 0 or 1. And bits are the building blocks of all digital data, forming the basis of binary code used by computers to process and store information. Next, we have bytes. A byte consists of 8 bits, and it is a fundamental unit of storage, and it is widely used to measure the size of digital data. So a single character within a text document, such as the letter A or the number 7, they would typically take up to 1 byte. But if we move outside of an English-centric environment, if we take, for example, the Irish language and let's say an A fada, this could take anywhere between 1 or 2 bytes, depending on how this character was encoded. If we take a Korean or a Japanese syllabic block, this could take anywhere up to 4 bytes, again, depending on how it was encoded. And then finally, if we look at emojis, which are very popular in this day and age, they can take anywhere up to 8 bytes. But that's a conversation for another day. To return to the slides, storage capacities are expressed in bytes and their multiples. So, for example, kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, and so on. Finally, we have digital files. A digital file is a collection of data stored on a computer or device composed of bits and bytes organized in a specific structure. So files can hold different types of content such as text, image, audio, video, etc. And how do they work? Well, files are created and interpreted by software. The specific structure or format of a file determines how the data is stored and understood. So how do these all connect? Well, at the lowest level, all digital information is represented in bits. That's the zeros and the ones. Groups of bits form bytes, which are the basic unit of storage. And bytes are organized according to specific rules to form files, enabling complex data to be stored and used. So now that we have a sense of the composition of digital material, let's investigate how to ensure bitstream preservation, that is protecting the bits and bytes that make up a digital file from loss or corruption. So with that, we have checksums and fixity. A checksum is a unique string or numerical value generated from a file's data using an algorithm, for example, MD5 or SHA-256. These are just 2 examples, there's many more. It acts like a digital fingerprint for the file. And checksums are fundamental for monitoring data integrity and detecting errors. Then we have fixity. Fixity refers to the property of a digital file remaining unchanged or stable over time. It involves confirming that the content of a file has not been altered either intentionally or accidentally. Fixity checks are routine processes that verify the integrity of a digital object, typically through checksum verification. And regular fixity checks are crucial in digital preservation to ensure that files remain unaltered, providing confidence that data has not been corrupted or degraded over time. And now let's look at an overview of a practical application of checksums. So when a file is created or transferred, a checksum can be generated and recorded. Later, when the file is checked again, its checksum can be recalculated and compared to the original value. If the checksums match, the file is intact. If they differ, it indicates that the file may have been altered or corrupted. So now that we have the foundations of digital preservation covered, rather than attempting to go into any great detail regarding content preservation and its many varied approaches, in the limited time that we have, I will instead direct you towards resources and support. So in this regard, my first port of call is always the Digital Preservation Coalition. They are a not-for-profit organization that supports the global digital preservation community by providing resources, advocacy, and expertise. They support and collaborate with organizations worldwide, particularly libraries, archives, museums, research institutions, and other stakeholders involved in preserving digital assets. So, a couple of resources and initiatives that they provide are advocacy support, community reports, case studies, toolkits, the Digital Preservation Handbook, the Rapid Assessment Model, and conferences, training, seminars, and webinars. So, with an understanding of the technical foundations of digital preservation, these resources, and even better with the support of the DPC as a member, you are in a very good position to start thinking about implementation strategy. So here is our digital preservation program. First, we have inventorying digital assets. The foundation of any digital preservation program is understanding what you have. And so you would want to identify locations by collaborating with stakeholders, document content and file types, collect all available metadata, and then use this information to assess risks. Next, we have the creation of a digital asset register. A digital asset register consolidates the inventory into a structured and manageable format. Next, we have policy. A preservation policy provides a framework for decision making and ensures consistency. In setting up a digital preservation policy, you would want to define scope and objectives, outline responsibilities, establish key principles, incorporate standards, and then review and approve. And of course, Kieran and Leona will be speaking about this in significantly more detail in a few moments. And then finally, we have the establishment of workflows or the revision of pre-existing workflows to incorporate digital preservation centered activities. And workflows, of course, operationalize the preservation policy and ensure consistent practice. There are also a number of ongoing considerations upon which digital preservation depends, and they are as follows: stakeholder engagement, training and documentation, and continuous improvement. So that is what a high level implementation looks like. And with that, I have come to the end of my introduction to digital preservation, but I will take a few moments to talk about the work that I'm currently doing in UCD Library. So a key focus of my work is conducting a comprehensive audit of our digital holdings across all library units. This begins with engaging directly with staff, in each unit through interviews. These conversations help me understand the nature and scope of the digital holdings in our care, assess their current preservation practices, and capture their perspectives and feelings about digital preservation. Once I have this contextual information, I move on to accessing storage locations to perform technical evaluations. I use software to run tasks like file format identification scans, virus scans, and file validation processes. This is essential to establish a baseline understanding of the state of our digital assets. A particular challenge in this process is working with legacy media and other forms of digital storage that can't be easily accessed. Um, Investigating these materials requires careful planning and contributes to a fuller picture of the library's digital holdings. All of this information, whether it be from interviews, technical scans, or legacy media assessments, feed into the creation of a digital asset register. This will serve as a central, structured record of our digital holdings, supporting their ongoing management and preservation. Additionally, this work will inform revisions to our existing digital preservation policy, ensuring it reflects the current and future needs of our collections. And another area of focus is integrating digital preservation tasks into existing and new workflows. So for example, I'm working on embedding processes like file format identification and secure file transfer into day-to-day operations. And this will ensure that preservation practices are not seen as separate, occasional tasks, but rather an integral part of how we manage digital content. I'm also conducting large-scale fixity checks across storage environments. As previously mentioned, fixity checks involve verifying that digital files remain unchanged over time, helping to ensure their integrity. So in summary, along with my colleagues, I hope to build a robust foundation for the long-term preservation of our library holdings. Through the audit, the development of a digital asset register, policy revisions, workflow integrations, and data integrity checks, we're creating a sustainable approach to digital preservation that will align with the library's broader mission. So I think that is everything. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions at the end, but for now, I will pass you on to Kieran and Leona.
Thank you, Niamh. I'll just get my screen set up. Okay, so hopefully that's sharing there okay. Brilliant. Okay, so let me start a timer. So my name is Kieran O'Leary. Leona Fearon and I are going to talk about our digital preservation policy. So I am the team lead for the Digital Preservation and Repository Services team here in the National Library. Leona joined us recently as a digital preservation analyst and is taking over responsibility from me in my former role for coordinating the implementation and review of the policy. So she's going to dig into the policy itself and the implementation next steps in the second half of what we're about to talk about. And actually, the policy itself was like kind of directly manifested in her role in the job description when we were creating the new team. But I'm going to take a step back to like 2022, 2023 direction and give some context around its creation, but also some resources that I could share with you around the policy's creation. So first and foremost, for those unaware, the National Library, our mission is to collect, protect, and share the recorded memory of Ireland. That's as relevant now as it was in 1877, although the memory is obviously increasingly digital. There were actually several draft policies, digital preservation policies created over the years, which never quite made their way to publication for various reasons. A key enabler for getting this one over the line was actually our corporate risk register. The lack of a policy was classified as a risk a couple of years ago, at like pre-COVID time, before I actually started. And that allowed for the creation of the policy to be prioritized as a kind of more strategic objective. Another key enabler was the NLI acknowledging the need to grow its digital preservation capability and capacity by creating new roles, and later an entire team, which Leona will talk about, So this allowed for more obvious owners and maintainers of the policy to emerge. And actually the extra time as well allowed digital collecting and preservation to mature quite a bit more in the NLI as well. But still, digital preservation has to be a shared concern for an entire institution, not just one person or department or system. And that very much made its way into the policy. While working on this talk, I realized that it was quite difficult to pick apart who kind of contributed what to it. We got like a huge amount of feedback across the library and collaboration, but it was largely assembled by Della Keating, Ono Carragon, and myself, with me being the lead on the development. But it was a very, very enjoyable process digging into it. So it's quite a team effort, even though I'm the speaker. But I thought it might be helpful for people starting their digital preservation policy journey to have some resources. So I thought the first one I would share is the Digital Preservation Policy Toolkit from the DPC, as Niamh mentioned. This allowed me to put some structure on things. Some people might take a little bit, or they might have an easier transition to policy writing. I'm much more used to like technical documentation, workflow writing, that kind of thing. Policy was very much not my comfort zone. This was wonderful because it gave a really strong sense of what should be in a policy, templates, how to engage your stakeholders, and linking in with things like DPC RAN and stuff like that. We actually loved that resource so much that we ended up organizing an event. This was myself and Maria Ryan, particularly taking the lead on this one, in 2023. To coincide with the publication of the policy, we brought the DPC over to give a workshop to peers within our sector, and we got some really nice feedback on that. I think it went down quite well. Something else that was very, very helpful was this particular resource. This is just like the Irish section of it, but it's up on GitHub, and it's a community curated attempt to capture all of the digital preservation strategies and policies that are out there. So just a caveat here, these are not organizational strategies, which is why the NLI's one is not here. So we just have a digital preservation policy, not a digital strategy. So I fully read or skimmed everything across the world that was here pretty much. Some of them you could kind of skip over pretty quickly. And the general trend that I picked up from this was really that policies can be aspirational. People are just starting their journey, or they can very much reflect more mature digital preservation programs. And both are equally valid as long as the policy is real and maintained and actualized and implemented within the organization. Something else that was really helpful was to line up very early some external reviewers. So this was a very collaborative process. I think there was a collaborative strain running through the whole policy creation. We got great feedback from across the world on this, from like the US National Archives, UCD, National Library New Zealand, DPC, and more. As Leona will touch on later when discussing DPC RAM, it's important to be open and transparent and allow peer critique, to be just as honest about what you're doing. We figured it was best to share it early with our peers. Like we wanted to make sure there was no low-hanging fruit that we were missing, or sometimes you get too close to these things and there's obvious errors that are just sticking out. A major one was that, for I think more of a stylistic reason, I can't remember why we chose to do this, a lot of our policy statements began with the NLI will do this and the NLI will do that. And it read to every one of the reviewers as if this was entirely aspirational. Like we weren't doing anything right now, but there was quite mature digital preservation happening, even though there were aspirational elements. And so little things like that are great to catch early on so you can reshape things. So going back to our own policy, the kind of last thing I'll say before I hand over to Leona is the structure of the National Library, especially at the time, and to a large degree now as well, reflected how the policy kind of came to be. So the NLI has three main collecting areas, three separate collecting departments, there being published collections, special collections, and digital collections, which is where Leona and I work. And just to focus on digital collections, we have Born Digital Archives, web archives, digitization embedded in here. And a lot of the digital preservation and digital collecting work was largely kind of focused here. However, all the other collecting departments are already having to face up to the challenge of digital in order to meet our strategic objectives, to collect the memory of Ireland and diversify the formats that we collect. More and more published material will be born digital, paper and physical material coming into manuscripts and the National Photographic Archive will also include laptops, drives, other carriers containing born digital material, for want of a better term, hybrid collections. So it's all happening already, and it's only going to grow and grow. So at that point, I'll hand you over to Leona, who's going to talk about how the structure of the National Library kind of defined what was in and out of the scope of the policy and how certain organizational changes were required to actually make it a real implementable policy.
Okay. Thanks, Kieran. So following on from what Kieran has outlined there, the policy was initially designed to cover all digital collections and importantly, the associated metadata with those collections. The bulk of the digital content originates from within our own team, the digital collections team. However, it's becoming more and more common that hybrid collections are forming in the other collecting areas, so physical media alongside the born digital. The digital preservation policy covers the digitised material, born digital, hybrid, as well as the web archives. However, the scope of the policy does not extend to what we would term the corporate or more administrative records of the library, which is covered elsewhere in our policies. The policy itself has 10 guiding principles, covering a wide range of things such as the need for skills and advocacy, the need for standards-based approach, and the need for appropriate infrastructure. However, I'm only going to focus on a few of our principles today. The first two we have here focus on the need for collaboration and engagement. As Kieran outlined earlier, the development of this policy wouldn't have been possible without extensive cross-organisational engagement. Whilst the policy itself is largely driven by what is now the Digital Preservation Repository Services team, which is myself and Kieran, the ethos is very much that digital preservation is a service we provide to the wider library itself. So we do this by engaging with the other departments and using what we know in digital preservation to assist in their preservation planning. So if there are certain standards or formats which can be better to work with, or indeed if we in the library have any influence as to what the ultimate preservation format might actually be. Another guiding principle is that we will actively engage with our donors, depositors, and creators who help build our digital collections. What this means in practice is that the depositors are very involved in the process of transferring and packaging the digital material. We have a number of workflows, and the depositor has been invited to package their material using DART workflows. And so far, there's been a 100% acceptance rate in this. This means the material will transfer to us bagged and with checksums already generated. That ensures there's been no changes to the material from transferring to the depositor to ourselves. Building on that work with donors, it's important to factor in the total cost of stewardship. It's not just the cost of the initial acquisition, but indeed the wider cost of stewardship across the entire life cycle of the collection, right through to access and reuse, and to consider the cost of ongoing preservation interventions we may need to take. So the cost of both hardware, software, as well as staff time and both the processing time, as well as the training time to become proficient users of such systems. A lot of this particular principle was influenced by the work of the OCLC. Okay. So on to implementation. The biggest change emanating from this policy from our point of view has been the creation of the new Digital Preservation Repository Services team. As I mentioned earlier, the ethos is that digital preservation will be provided to the wider organisation as a service. The Digital Collecting Steering Group is a cross-departmental group and provides governance of the digital preservation policy, its review, and monitors its implementation. This group was previously the Digitisation Steering Group, but the renaming and reconstitution of the group is as a direct result of the policy, just reflects the wider role of digital preservation, as well as the expansion to include born digital archives and hybrid collections, such as the physical media that arrive with the traditional paper collections. It being a cross-organisational group also emphasises that digital preservation is a service for the entire organisation and not just the digital collections team. Again, this is reflected in the name of our team as Digital Repository Services rather than team. One of the initial services our team will provide is that of a new digital preservation system for the library. So at present, we're actively exploring potential options for a new system or systems that we would hope to procure in 2025. So this is an exciting time to be joining the library and being able to build this new system from the ground up. So at present, we're working with a number of internal groups to just define and scope out our requirements for that system. And in doing so, we're actually discovering more about the users of digital records and how this goes beyond what and who we had initially thought would be users of the digital repository. So the review of this policy was initially scheduled for June of this year. However, with the creation of the new team, it was felt to be more useful and more impactful to undertake this review when the new team was in place. So this will be something we look at then in early 2025. Benchmarking is an important part in evaluating our current work and the maturity of our current approach. So to this end, the library undertook what we have been calling a mini RAM, or rapid assessment model. So this was an assessment of the maturity of just the digital collections department. Next year, we're planning what we've termed a super RAM, and that will involve every section of the library conducting their own mini RAMs, which will then be coordinated into the super RAM. So the last mini RAM that was done, having went through the digital preservation policy development, we found our approach to this was a bit different. In some areas, we marked ourselves up by a mark, but in other areas, we marked ourselves down. And that wasn't because things had necessarily regressed, but it was just through having gone through the process of the policy development, there was now a deeper understanding of the different areas of RAM. And it was also important that we answer honestly to get the most benefit from this assessment. So in this way, the end result would be more accurate and just more useful for our own planning purposes. So having gone through that, it allowed appropriate goals to be identified and plans made to get to the next levels, which could then be reported back to the digital collecting steering group. And it also allowed certain projects to be prioritised and then fed into our quarterly and yearly action planning. So the super RAM we have planned for next year will be an example of this. Core Trust Seal certification is another community maturity model. So this is an international community-based, non-governmental and non-profit organisation that provides certification for archives and repositories that store data long-term. In the next year, we will be seeking to attain trusted digital repository status via Core Trust Seal certification. So this will just demonstrate the library's commitment to long-term preservation and continued accessibility to all of the digital content it collects and generates. This will be another large project that the new team will be driving forward, but very much one of collaboration, as it will involve many stakeholders from across the entire library. So yeah, a digital preservation policy is essential. It drives forward this area of work and promotes the visibility of this area across the organisation. Through this policy, we've been able to identify the need for a new team and given structure around where we as an organisation aspire to be. The policy itself is both realistic as well as aspirational. It's allowed us to identify areas of weakness and where we need to focus our attention. The acquisition of the new digital repository system in the coming year will no doubtedly present further challenges to us as a team and likely influence our approach to reviewing this policy when it comes to next year. Thanks very much for listening. Our contact details are here. I'll just hand over now to Anya from RTE on digitisation projects.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen with sound. One sec. Can anyone see them okay? Perfect, thank you. Well, hello everyone, and thank you LIR and Neve for kindly inviting me to speak to you today about leading RTE Archive's audio content digitization project. It's been an extraordinary journey, and I'm thrilled to share some of the insights with you today. My goal is kind of straightforward today. I want to introduce you to the digitization project and connect it to the digital preservation principles we have heard about today. I kind of really want to encapsulate the complexities of the project, so that's a bit of a challenge in 15 minutes, but challenge accepted. And as a final treat, I want to actually leave you with some of the sound recordings that form part of this collection. So after 3 years in the making, the project is ending early next year, and I'm thrilled to share it has already received some significant recognition, namely the Fiat and IFTA Achievement Award in Media Preservation, And today I'd like to share some of the jury comments with you because they beautifully reflect the key principle at the heart of this initiative, which is collaboration. So to set up, we really collaborated with or seek guidance from international organizations such as the International Federation of Television Archives, the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, and the European Broadcasting Union. So these are kind of bodies that provide you with standards to set out requirements, and we also contributed to those standards. I suppose it really has helped us to achieve a complete set of requirements for our goals, which was the mass or is the mass migration of digitization of 20th century media formats here at RCE. Another big aspect of this project was discoverability. Many collections in our care lacked electronic records, so we still had things on actually on index cards and label information. It's just such a vast archive, and so I think beyond that, also the content reflected in a very rich dual language history, which required advanced transcription tools to unlock its potential. And to advance this, we partnered with Dublin City University, Fronta agus Galna Gaeilge, who are conducting research into Irish dialects preserved in RTE's spoken word collections. And of course, the biggest collaboration was really internal. It was a really small but mighty team of expert archivists, librarians, technologists, and many other departments here at RTE that made this happen, or that needed to be coordinated or communicated to. That really brings me to the scale of this project, and let me give you a sense. The project in itself focused purely on quarter-inch reel-to-reel tapes that you've just seen in the first image, and optical disc carriers. And I'll admit, when I started the project, I really felt intimidated by the sheer size of it. It's really kind of a lot. And I try to make it a little bit more fun by starting to think of numbers that would really capture its purpose. So the project spans over 80 years of broadcast history, translating into an incredible 330,000 hours of content. The content is stored on over 200,000 individual objects made from artificial, natural, and organic materials. And these objects weigh an astounding 80 tons. It was a very physical 3 years for us. And if you were to unspool the tapes alone, the reel-to-reel tapes alone, they would stretch an estimated 40,000 kilometers, enough to wrap around the Earth, ChatGPT tells me. And once this material is digitized, it will require approximately 200 terabytes of digital storage. So I think that kind of gives you a sense of the scale and significance of the project, and not just in preserving podcast heritage, but also the monumental effort that it was required to make this happen. So let me tell you a little bit about how we made that happen. So much of the project took place really underground in vaults. I felt sometimes we haven't seen the daylight in a few days. It kind of often felt like an archaeological dig, unearthing the treasures from broadcast history, and it reminded me of stratification and archaeological care, in a sense that, you know, you kind of work through the layers, uncover and preserve what lies beneath. And that kind of idea of stratification helped me to shape the planning, the project, breaking it down, breaking it into phases, first of all, pre-digitization, digitization, and post-digitization. And then each of the phases was like broken further down into building blocks. And the building blocks that you see here on the screen were further broken down into decision trees, guidelines, and documentation effort for each and every action. To design those kind of workflows, I like to lean on preservation metadata implementation strategies called Premise. I've done so before at the DRI, and I kind of really like to use it as a framework because it promotes kind of a kind of strategic thinking on a granular level by focusing on agents, environments, and events, perfectly aligned with the Open Archival Information System, I guess. So if you imagine that each of the tapes that you see here on the left, and there is about 80,000 of them, was moving through that assembly. And for every action, we ask who or what is performing the action, when and where is it happening, and how can we make that process traceable and repeatable. So to give an example, for physical asset preparation, that meant that we will follow health and safety guidelines. And we also will follow ISO standards in handling quarter-inch tape, which a lot of people had forgotten how to do. And we documented which operator performed the set of tasks, such as repairing, dusting, barcoding, at which vault that was happening, and we recorded that into a spreadsheet to keep track. I think another great example would be quality assurance at the phase of digitization, which we have partnered with an external vendor with. They were actually performing so I should say actually by there, I mean both software and human agents are involved in identifying audio errors. And the human effort was achieved through a 3-point check, which utilized QR-coded glossaries to standardize error description, which were then documented in XML format. Again, the same applied for metadata transcription, so handwritten titles and dates from the labels were transcribed according to agreed guidelines, and with operators and timestamp meticulously logged, so we can trace back where maybe an error was forming. Post-digitization as well, for every item delivered back to us in form of an agreed submission information package, we tracked when, where, and how recording, which software performed file fixity and specification checks along the way. So this structured approach not only helped us to stay on track, but also ensured that every step of the process was transparent, sustainable, and measurable. So when we set out to plan, we actually timed by the seconds. It's just because of the sheer volumes of it. Because I kind of delved into documentation there a little bit, let me demonstrate how we applied the Open Archive Information Systems model of preservation description information, which kind of has 4 key parts: reference information, provenance information, context information, and fixity, which we have learned about today already. Let me start with reference information, which ensures the preservation object is distinguishable and locatable. And for this project, we carefully documented key details such as the digitization date, the originator, and the unique identifiers for both the physical and the digital asset. And these details were embedded into the file header following the federal agency Digital Guidelines Initiative standard for broadcast file format. This is also known as the BEX chunk. And you see that on the top left here. You see RCE, you see our identifier, you see the origination date of the digitization, and you also see on the very top the barcodes for the and the digital identifiers for the local principal ID and the local principal ID source. So Apache was really, really helpful for me to standardize that bit. We also have sidecar information, which you see further below, which brings me on to provenance information, which tracks the life cycle of an object to maintain authenticity. To give a kind of anecdote, really, one of our quality control operators detected a really subtle distortion during playback, and that was a problem that was invisible to tools like waveform visualization or spectrograms. So the quality control mechanism didn't pick it up. So after investigation, we discovered there was a loose spring in the tension arm of the digitization machine that you can see highlighted in the metadata here to the left, which is a Studer A801 serial number 10572, kind of memorable. The vendor had kept detailed logs documenting every tape digitized with this machine, but obviously we couldn't go at this point and redigitize everything. So it was really, really great that they also documented the event of maintenance and the every event of calibration of this machine. So we could ring fence about 500 tapes that we had to redigitize because of that abnormality. So that's a great example of how integrity is really maintained for this one. Another one is context information that I want to explain a little bit about, which preserves relationship and meaning. On the right here, a little bit fainted, you can see a map of Ireland. And this is really the work of Andrea Palandri, the researcher we work with at DCU. He used RTE's datasets to analyze and transcribe Irish dialects of speakers, and by creating an agent profile for each speaker on anim.ie and enriching them with rich geographical information from loganim.ie, he added valuable context to the data. And those profiles I just mentioned, they will also be linked back to RTE archives through the embedded unique identifier I mentioned earlier. So this is kind of like a nice way of explaining structured contextual metadata by example. And then, of course, there's fixity information, which protects against unauthorized modifications. But Neve has done a great job of explaining that to us already. I think I hope I've successfully demonstrated the importance of collaboration to start with, and the value of adhering to standards, and the crucial role that metadata plays in digital preservation. But I'd also like to conclude by highlighting an essential factor in digital preservation, which is skills or upskilling. There was a couple of skills or insights that made a huge difference to me in that project, or would have meant a different outcome. So I want to just highlight 4 for each digitization phase. For the pre-digitization phase, I would like to give my dad a big shout out for sharing his insights of modular assembly line in car manufacturing. If you ever need a portable HEPA-filtered extraction unit for safely handling conservation issue in your vault, so on site, this company here, Esther, has the blueprint for you. So that really made a big difference for us to do so safely. Another shout out goes to Annie Schweikert and New York University Library, who generously shared their invaluable strategy for optical disk migration online. When I started this project, I had to upskill on a lot of things very quickly, and without her sharing that, I think I wouldn't have known about how music CDs are written and what various standards like Red Book Standard, Green Book Standard are involved, and that we needed to look out for when we set out our requirements with the vendor. Gratitude also goes to Sebastian Lekalnek, whose blog To Kill a Coding Bird pinpointed the UDF-8 versus ANSI Latin 1 character encoding issue that corrupted all of my Irish language file names in transit. And Eve, I'd love to read your thesis on the subject, really. This is such a valuable area of exploration. And it really helped me to rectify the issue by just knowing about it in detail. And finally, my best companion throughout was this VLOOKUP formula. It really enabled me to keep track of more than 200,000 objects throughout every digitization phase, which is something that you can't do manually. So as promised, I want to leave you with a little bit of sound today. This recording is a 1-minute recording, a clip from a shellac disk that I had the privilege to preserve digitally. It was captured originally by Prentice O'Connell, who had the foresight to document many Irish language dialects, traveling from town to town with a mobile recording unit. So here's me with my mobile extraction unit, and he was this mobile recording unit like so many years before me. And in this episode, he visits Irish colleges in Donegal, and this recording originally aired on Radio Éireann on the 23rd of August, 1950. So let me play that for you, and thank you for listening. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.